Get ready to go on the defensive, everyone. Because today, we're going to Shield Town. That's right. We're making the Knight's Shield from Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. A little tutorial action for you. So follow along, make one for yourself. Here we go. Alright, so if you don't know what Legend of Zelda is, or Breath of the Wild, or any of that stuff, it's a video game, so hold on to your pants, but it's still going to be cool even if you're not into video games. And for those of you who know, well, you really know. I finally got around to playing this game. I know it's been out for a while, but I've been taking a lot of plane rides, and it's great to have something so, you know, when you're sitting in that tin can hurtling through the sky, you can just focus on anything else. If you've played the game, you know a lot of the armor, shields, weapons are all really fantastic and are not practical in any sense. But there's a few pieces, this shield, that I saw and I thought, wow, that'd actually be a really cool project, and it looks simple enough that I can create a tutorial. I can do it with less equipment. There's going to be some nice equipment, but if you have limited equipment, you should still be able to follow along and make one for yourself. So the base of my shield is a 2-foot by 2-foot piece of mild weld steel. You can find sheets like this at a lot of the big box stores, you know, Home Depot, Lowe's, that kind of thing. Depending on the store, you might not be able to find a piece this big. This is also 10 gauge, which is pretty thick. I probably should have gone with like a 12 gauge, maybe even a 14, so please keep that in mind for your own project. I got this piece. It was either Metals Depot or Metals Online or McMaster-Carr. So what you want to start off doing is mapping out the shield, and the first thing to mapping out anything is to create a center line. So I'm going to come halfway down, I'm going to create my center line. Now at this point, I'm going to create a grid and basically map off the picture I have on my phone. And a kind of an easy and a little bit crude way to do this is, I know my piece is going to be 2 foot tall, right? And 2 feet wide. So I'm going to use something of relative size, a pencil, or say your finger, and take your finger and put it on the drawing after it's maybe blown up a little bit, and see how many finger widths you have down the drawing. For me, I have 6 fingers. We'll lay down across my picture here. So I know that this little piece from top to bottom, this like pinnacle point to where it hits its widest, is going to be about 1/6 of the overall length. 24 divided by 6 is of course 4, so I'm going to come down 4 inches and make some marks, make a line there, and that will be where the shield starts to head up towards that top point. I went ahead and decided I want this shield to be about 16 inches wide. So 24 minus 16, that's 8, divided by 2 is 4. So I'm going to come in 4 inches from either side and go ahead and make a point. And that's going to be the sides of the shield, and I'll take that down in a grid as well. Now the same thing with the bottom. You have that, we know that there's a center point, there's a centerpiece on the material. That's where it's going to come down to that point. I'm going to use my finger again and go, oh, look at that, it's 2 finger widths on my drawing, so that's going to be 8 inches total. So I'm going to come up 8 inches and make some marks, and that will be where the point kind of curves up and then hits that widest section in the middle. And now it's as simple as connecting all the dots and creating a very boxy, angular outline of this shield. Sorry everybody, the camera died, but you can see here what I did was very gently just kind of scribble, sketch out the gentle curves. Instead of having those hard angular lines, especially at the bottom, it is not that acute. So I just very carefully, I'm still connecting the dots, but I'm just kind of sketching in a little bit of a round area and just eyeballing that it's pretty darn close, and you should be totally fine. Grab your angle grinder with a cutoff wheel, just take it slow, know that you can always leave a little bit extra and come back and grind it down. So take your time, leave that curve, leave that line, you'll be fine. This piece right now, as it stands cut out, is 9 pounds exactly. So yeah, definitely go for a thinner gauge, which is a higher gauge, so probably 12 or 14, really, if you don't want this thing to be a monster. Grab yourself a flap disc, go ahead and round over all of these edges, knock off those burrs, make it nice to handle. Go ahead and reattack these curved sections. You don't want them just like very sharp straight lines. You kind of want to follow your sketch lines and kind of redo those nice gentle curves to each point. Moving on to the border of the shield, that thicker outside border, there's a couple different ways you can do this. This is a fabrication project, as you know, so we're not going to be like forging up and doing any raising or anything like that. But there's a couple different ways. One, if you can't get a hold of another big piece and you just want to use some scrap pieces, that's what I'm going to show you first. I know I want my border to be 1.5 inches wide, so I'm going to go ahead and basically create 1.5 inch strips that will eventually be welded up together. You can really be scrappy here and save a bunch of money if you want. Like these pieces, I think they're 14 gauge steel that's just been laying around. I got them from Home Depot years ago. So I'm tracing these lines, and now I'm using a pair of calipers set at the right width, the 1.5 inches, and I'm going to basically scratch and trace and then fill the line in, cut it out. I mean, it's color by numbers, really. Just cut your angles to match. Just cut your angles to match up clean. For these bottom pieces, I'm just going to let them overhang on the outside of the shield so that I can just grind off that excess and get that curve, and then I will grind in on the inside once I have this whole piece welded up together to get that inner curve. Now it's time to weld. Yeah, there's no getting around it. Yeah, you gotta have a welder for this project. But I've done this same project with like those really crappy flux core welders from Harbor Freight. You know, they're like 90 bucks. So it's totally possible. You don't need a big, nice welder. It does make it easier, but you can do it with a little flux core welder and a little bit of patience. Make sure you clamp your pieces down before you weld. They're gonna warp no matter what, but this is gonna help them from going crazy and getting nice, even welds on your seams and having that all work out instead of trying to mess with these floppy noodles. Now just blend those welds in real nice. At these bottom pieces, go ahead and trace in your interior curves and grind those in as well. Once your piece is all cleaned up, it is good to go. Now that's one technique you can use if you just have scrap laying around, but if you have the means to do it, like I did here, I went ahead and just got another full sheet of 10 gauge and traced it all out just like I did with this other piece, but in one solid piece. I wanted it a little bit thicker, and it's just nicer if it's in one piece. You can still do the multi-piece technique, nothing wrong with that, so it's a couple different options. Now it's just a matter of welding this exterior, this border piece, to the base of the shield. Now you want to, again, make sure it's clamped down. You don't want any warping or disfiguring happening while you're working on this, while you're welding it. Also make sure your welds are full. Make sure there's no like bubbling, no splatter. Especially if you're using a cheap welder, you want to make sure you're totally filled in, because you're going to blend and grind these welds out, but you don't want to do that and then realize you've missed a bunch of little spots and have to go back 100 times. So just take your time, lay a nice thick bead if you have to, and make sure, yeah, there's no gaps and holes. Alright, so you're all welded up. That's inside and outside. The outside's a little tricky, but it's very important that you get a nice strong bead all the way around on that outside border as well. So now you're going to get yourself a nice flap disc on your angle grinder, grind those welds down. You're really going to work the lip, that inside lip of the bevel, and almost just push like straight in with the angle grinder and work it in such a way that these welds need to be gone. You need to see that they're not there, because that's really going to sell this thing. If you see that there's these tool marks, that there's weld splatter here and there, that's not going to look so great. So really take your time blending these in. So here's the part where we might start to lose some people. So this shield has to get bent correctly, right? So far we've needed very minimal tools, but at this point we kind of need some fire. Not necessarily, especially if you go with a thinner gauge than I went. Say you go with like a 14 gauge steel or something, something thinner, definitely much thinner than this 10 gauge. This is mild steel, and if you really work at it with a hammer, over an anvil, over something, anything, a table, whatever you got, you can cold work this at least somewhat and try to beat it back into shape. See gang, even I don't have the right equipment for this, but if you just get a little bit of heat on there, it moves a lot easier. So throw it up in the forge. I'm just gonna have to work a little different sections at a time, just a little bit at a time. But the key here isn't necessarily skill, but patience. If you just kind of patiently work through this thing, I mean, we all know what a shield looks like. It has a concave, and you can make it look like whatever you want, really. So you're just gonna beat it in such a way, and make sure you're using your offhand to help manipulate and fight against your hammer. And you're just trying to get a nice gentle curve in this thing. If you want to bend it and not beat it, if you've got some kind of vise or something you can put this in, whatever works. But remember, just take your time and try not to get too frustrated. Hey, one of the great tools out here is a floor. If you have a nice level floor, even if it's okay level, that's fine. But these things get really twisted easily, and it's hard to see until it's on a flat surface, and then you see it rocking back and forth. So that's a good tool to keep you in check. Now that we have the shape we want, it's time to move on to the little rivets. Obviously these are fake because your border's welded on. So I'm going to measure out some even hole placement so that's nice and symmetrical. Drill some holes that are bigger than these rivets. Now these little like forge looking square-headed rivets, these are just screws that you can buy at a hardware store. And I'm just going to push them through these holes. So it's a little bit bigger than the threads because you're not threading it in, and then I'm going to weld the back side shut and grind that smooth, and then it looks nice and cool, and like you put in some real expert blacksmithing work on this thing. For the shield handle, once again, if you have a forge, at this point even a map gas torch, because the area is so small, that would probably work. But if you can heat up the metal and forge out yourself a nice little crescent handle here, that'd be great. As you can see, I'm not being very scientific, and I'm just kind of measuring off my hand and what would work, or maybe if I had a glove on, give yourself a little bit of extra room there. So I'm gonna forge this handle, but you could probably still cold work it if you went with a thinner gauge mild steel, and then just thicken it up with some leather later, or padding, or whatever you want to do. And then I'm also gonna make 2 small brackets, which would be really easy to do cold, but hey, the forge is on, so why not? These 2 little square brackets are going to hold the belt, the 2 belt pieces that strap your arm into this thing. You probably don't want to go too far separated. And think about the angle of the belt, think about how it's going to sit. Those are going to get welded to the shield, and then of course the handle, make sure you put it where it feels comfortable for you. Grab yourself a flap disc and go ahead and blend those welds in nice and good. Alright, we're going to finish off the metal work with a wire brush wheel attachment to your angle grinder. Now these come in a couple different variations, and how they fit on the grinder and how they spin, it's all relatively the same here. I will say that these things are incredibly dangerous. They can grab onto your clothes really easily. You won't notice, but your shirt or something might be billowing a little bit from the air from the angle grinder, and they can just snag that and pull it into the machine, and it's going to be bad news bears. So be really careful and just go ahead and wire brush the entire surface, front and back. Get it as clean as you can, and that wire brush is going to leave a nice kind of textured look. It's not going to completely grind it down like sandpaper would or a flap disc and leave a shiny look. It's still gonna look kind of like beat up steel, if that makes sense. I'm gonna go ahead and paint the back of the shield. You're not gonna see it. It's gonna keep it clean, keep it from rusting, keep your getting gross grubbiness on it essentially. That's up to you if you want to do the same thing. Just a nice satin black. Up next, go ahead and wipe down the front of the shield really good. Get any oil or grime off of it, because we're going to use some gun blue or gun black or whatever it is, cold blue. This is a great little chemical. You can get it on places like Amazon, anywhere on the internet. It's not very expensive. And make sure you wear gloves, but go ahead and you just wipe it and work it under the metal, and it's going to react with the surface. It kind of oxides, but in a bluish black, a blackish blue. I don't really know the science, but it looks great. And what you could do is put it on really thick, really work it in, do a bunch of layers, quote unquote, and then you take a Scotch-Brite pad and a little bit of oil, and you just very gently work it back, and it'll create a smoky effect. The black effect is cool too. It's kind of a shiny to matte black look if you want to go for that, but it's great for like kind of smoky, smoking stuff up, if that makes sense. Alright everybody, whip out your cowhides. It is leather time. Now leather can be very intimidating if you don't mess with it, so please don't feel like you have to do this. You can definitely get around it. Maybe go to a fabric store, get some pleather, use glue and things. I'm making my own belts, but you can totally just buy, I don't know, a cheap belt from Walmart, cut that thing in half, boom, there you go. No worries. So I'm going to make a little backing here. You could put any kind of padding you want, and I'm going to also be putting some leather to thicken up this handle that I'm going to grip with my hand, give it a little, little grippy there. So, but you can use, bike tape, whatever you want to do, however you feel that flow going. So, important thing is have fun. Hot glue is going to work great to put this main leather back piece on. It's going to stick really well. It's going to get into the kind of leather fibers and hold it down tight. I mean, heck, even Elmer's glue works great on leather. Hey, if you are a little bit of a leatherhead and you're following along or want to get into this, I mean, this is just veg tan leather, Elmer's glue, white school glue to hold it together. I'm using a wax thread to sew these belt straps together. I got the belt fittings from Tandy, Tandy leather, where I also got the leather, and I'm using a Briar Brown gel dye. My leather punch broke, just in case you're wondering, but hey, drill bits work too. For this handle, just use some hot glue at both ends of this leather cord, and make sure you wrap it really, really tight so that it's not going to slide around and move as you're out there doing battle. Make sure to also sew up your belt pieces, because that glue's not going to hold if you're going crazy. And if you're new to leather, you know that a needle is just not going to go through this thing. I used a little baby drill bit, or you can use a punch to make that initial hole for your thread. Alright gang, we're on the home stretch. Last thing is to paint this symbol from Breath of the Wild on the front of the shield. Now what I have here is a blown up picture I printed off the internet. This is going to be my poor man's stencil. So I'm just going to very carefully and with a very sharp knife cut out this thing, and I'm going to tape it to the shield, and I'm going to use it as a stencil. And you know what? Hey, it's gonna work. Make sure once again you clean off the front of the shield really good. I would recommend soap and water and dry it really nicely before you tape this thing down. It's gonna make sure that the tape sticks and that the paint sticks, because you don't want paint that's barely sitting on the surface, because it's gonna come off and you're gonna be sad later. So I use two different paints. I use the primer to set it up, and then like a brush on Rust-Oleum red paint. And you're really going to want to do multiple layers here. Let it dry, do another layer, take your time. You don't want to let it run underneath that stencil, because you did all this work on this stencil. You did all this work on the shield, so you know you want to get a lot of layers on there so it's not chipping off later. Go ahead and put those final finishing touches on there. Just very gently, rub some dirt on it, scrape up that battle damage, make it look as nice as you can. You don't want it to be freshly painted. Give it that illusion of hard use. And if you've been following along, well, congratulations. You just got yourself a brand new, used shield. Now go out and save Hyrule.
Yeah, tomatoes. That is probably what still suck.
I didn't want things that were gonna splatter too hard, and then I'd have to clean up splatter juice.